This case occurred in the United States of America in a small rural town called Richwoods, located in Washington County, Missouri. It was there that one of the heroes of today's story lived, Sean Hornbeck, a cheerful boy born on July 17, 1991. By 2002, Sean still lived in this small and quiet Midwestern town with his mother, Pam Akers, her husband, Craig Akers, and his older sisters, Jackie and Jenny. It should be noted that Craig was not the biological father of Pam's children, but he was the father who provided affection, care, and attention. Sean's mother had divorced several years earlier and later married Craig. The boy and his stepfather developed a special, warm, and trusting relationship. Sean always perceived the man as his own father. At 11 years old, young Hornbeck was a good student. He was in the 5th grade of elementary school, loved spending time with friends, and baseball held a special place in his heart. In short, he was an ordinary child from a good family living in a quiet town. However, bad things often happen to good people. No one could have imagined that something like this could happen to this family. On Sunday, October 6, 2002, it was an ordinary day. The boy got bored, so he asked his parents for permission to go play at a friend's house. There was nothing unusual about this. He had done it dozens of times before. For this reason, his parents had no objections and let him go with only one condition. He had to return home by 5 p.m. to have dinner with the family. The boy said goodbye to his parents, then took his bicycle and set off in search of fun. Closer to 5 p.m., Pam and Craig began to think that their son wouldn't make it back in time for dinner. At first, they didn't attach much importance to it, as lateness was common for children. Still, minutes passed, and the boy didn't appear at the doorstep. In the end, the Akers couple decided to call the parents of Sean's friend, whom he was supposed to visit. The information they heard during the phone conversation left them stunned. It turned out that their son had never reached his destination. The boy's parents tried to calm down. They assumed that their child had probably changed his mind and gone to some other friend. In the end, they started calling all of their son's acquaintances, but no one knew anything about his whereabouts. By then, night had fallen. Knowing that Sean was afraid of the dark, Pam and Craig didn't waste time and reported their son's disappearance to the police. Local authorities, in turn, contacted the National Center for Missing Children and also reported the incident to other agencies. Soon after, police officers, with the support of FBI agents, began searching for the missing child. Neighbors, friends, and simply concerned citizens also organized several volunteer search parties that immediately began combing both the surroundings and the road the boy might have taken. They were eager to find Sean as soon as possible or, at the very least, discover some clues that could shed light on what had happened to him. Investigators, in turn, began interviewing local residents who lived in houses along the boy's possible route. As a result of the work done, they managed to establish that several eyewitnesses had seen Sean riding his bicycle not far from the school. According to the interviewees, who knew the boy well, he met one of his older sisters and her friend. The young man talked with the girls for a while and then rode away. Apparently, he turned onto the road and passed by the Catholic church. Other interviewees stated that they saw the boy turn onto a dirt road that apparently led to his friend's house. Thus, authorities were able to determine the place where the missing boy was last seen. Since then, nothing more was known about Sean's whereabouts. After 3 days of full-scale searches in the town's surroundings and forested areas, as well as reconstructing Sean's possible route, flyers with the missing child's image and his physical details continued to be distributed throughout the county. He was described as a 5th-grade student whose height was 1 meter 40 centimeters, and approximate weight did not exceed 40 kilograms. He had brown eyes and light brown hair. When he was last seen, he was wearing an orange t-shirt and blue jeans. Among other things, it was noted that Sean was riding a mountain bike. Not getting quick results, the police began checking all criminals registered in the area where the teenager was searched. They were primarily interested in those law violators who had previously been convicted for kidnapping and molesting minors. Around this time, authorities began receiving numerous versions regarding the whereabouts of the missing boy, including a car accident that occurred the day before young Hornbeck's disappearance. However, during the investigation of this version, it was established that in the framework of this automotive incident, It was not a child who was injured, but a dog. Over the following months, authorities checked all received information in one way or another, no matter how absurd it was. For example, among the messages related to the boy's disappearance were assumptions that the case could be connected to prohibited substances. Supposedly, the child accidentally discovered a laboratory where they were produced or was even kidnapped by criminals to extort a batch of prohibited substances. In the end, these guesses led nowhere. To search for traces of Sean in the area where he disappeared, groups of search dogs were sent multiple times, and one such dog marked the shore of a nearby lake as a place where the child might have been. In connection with this, the police involved divers in the search for the teenager. The lake was examined several times using underwater cameras. However, no remains of a body were found on the bottom in the obtained footage. Since this place was the only one marked by the search dogs, Sean's parents did not want to stop the searches, and authorities decided to drain the lake. This operation took about 3 days and turned out to be fruitless. After that, Pam and Craig continued to search for their son by all available means. They printed new flyers and also created a website and the Sean Hornbeck Fund to disseminate and receive any information about the boy's disappearance. In addition, the Akers couple gave dozens of interviews to various media outlets that offered to cover the case of the teenager's disappearance. However, despite their efforts, they did not receive significant leads. Time passed and authorities were running out of strength. It was then that a mysterious man named Lou appeared in the case, a lonely hermit living in the forest, who reported to police officers about a dream in which he saw a child. Lou was interrogated multiple times, and some of the information he provided did receive confirmation. But soon it became clear that there was no truth in his words. No one connected him to the kidnapping, and in the end, he was excluded from the list of informants, leaving him on the list of people of interest to the investigation. Time continued to pass, and no new leads appeared. Thus, the investigation practically stalled. Sean's family, in turn, did everything not to let this case be forgotten. They continued to appear on various television shows, some of which were frankly dubious. In one such program, an invited expert psychic stated that Sean was dead. Among other things, he provided several details about the supposed location of the child's body, which turned out to be false. At the local level, the Akers received serious support from both friends and ordinary concerned citizens. This allowed them to place information on several billboards. Pam and Craig also hired private detectives, spending all their savings on it. Unfortunately, almost all the measures taken proved ineffective. More than 4 years had passed since Sean's disappearance when, in Missouri, just 72 kilometers from the Akers family home, another little boy disappeared. This was Ben Ownby, whom everyone knew as a cheerful 13-year-old youth. He disappeared on January 8, 2007, in a town called Beaufort, Franklin County, while returning home from school. That day, his father returned home in the afternoon, as always expecting to find his son playing on the computer. But this day was different. Ben simply wasn't home, and there were no signs that he had returned from school at all. Don, the boy's father, immediately called his wife to check if she knew where their son might be. The woman's answer was negative. As a result, Don went to the school, assuming that some sports or public event might be taking place in the afternoon where his son could be present. However, this version was not confirmed. All the children left school at the usual time, and no one missed the bus. Learning this, Don became worried about his son. For this reason, he went home and contacted the parents of other children who lived in the same area to find out if any of the teenagers had seen Ben. Fortunately, Don managed to talk to 15-year-old Mitchell Hooch, who was returning home on the same bus as his son. According to Mitchell, they got off the bus with Ben and each went their own way. He said that he noticed a white minivan that slowly headed in the same direction as Ben. Hearing this information, the father of the missing boy immediately called the emergency services. Receiving the report from the child's father, who partially outlined the situation, police officers immediately began an investigation. They understood that in cases of child abductions, the first hours of the search are particularly important. In connection with this, they informed operational agents from the FBI, who had extensive experience in such cases. At the same time, local authorities began distributing informational flyers with Ben's image throughout the city. They indicated that the missing boy's height was 1 meter 47 centimeters, and his weight was approximately 45 kilograms. He had blue eyes, chestnut hair, and glasses for vision. At the time of disappearance, he was wearing a hooded shirt. Overall, there weren't many leads, only the information obtained from Mitchell, who told Dawn about the white van. Police representatives interviewed the young man, and he told them that he saw a van unusual for this area, a Nissan brand. According to the guy, the vehicle was following Ben. He also noted that the vehicle had a rusty fender on the passenger side, a convex rear window, a hitch device, and a dent on the doors. Unfortunately, the guy did not remember any license plate numbers or external characteristics of the driver. Initially, investigators found it unusual that the witness was able to remember and recount so many details about the alleged kidnapper's car. They even assumed that the guy was simply drawing attention to himself and suggested he take a polygraph test. Mitchell gladly agreed and successfully passed the test. When police officers asked him how he managed to remember so many details, the young man replied that he had always been attracted to such cars. Based on the information obtained from Mitchell, investigators combed every centimeter near the abduction site. They also distributed flyers among other police officers and citizens with information about Ben's disappearance and the characteristics of the vehicle on which, in their opinion, the criminal was moving. From their side, employees of the forensic service went to the place where, according to the only witness, the wanted minivan was spotted. At this location, they managed to take casts of tracks left by two types of tires, both of which could be matched to the previously described vehicle. During the investigation, police officers established a certain similarity between Ben's abduction and the traceless disappearance of Sean, which occurred more than 4 years earlier. The boys were approximately the same age, had similar physiological typology, and moreover, the disappearances occurred relatively close to each other. However, there was also an important difference, namely the presence of a witness who provided substantial information about the alleged kidnapper's vehicle. In the end, all the information provided by Mitchell received widespread dissemination. Posters were plastered throughout the city. At the same time, law enforcement officers set up numerous checkpoints in the hope of finding the car in question. After some time, investigators came to the conclusion that, based on a number of characteristics, the car of the man who claimed to have dreams about Sean's abduction matched the wanted vehicle. Thus, police officers interrogated the suspicious man again, and this time they definitively excluded him from the list of people connected to the case. All this work undoubtedly bore fruit, and the criminal's vehicle was eventually discovered. At the moment, there are several versions of how this happened. According to the first, 2 police officers who arrived at a residential complex to serve a subpoena noticed a car parked in the lot that matched the description from the alert. In the end, the officers decided to conduct a visual inspection of the van. A few minutes later, a man named Michael Devlin approached them and stated that he was the owner of the Nissan. After verifying that the vehicle indeed belonged to Michael, the police asked if he knew about the abduction of a child named Ben. The man replied yes. Then the officers asked Michael to accompany them to his apartment, and then his behavior changed. He quite sharply refused the law enforcement representatives and hurried away home. Some time later, FBI agents came to his doorstep. However, this time too, Michael made it clear that he had no relation to Ben's abduction and would not allow anyone into his apartment. Thus, given the man's strange behavior, the police quickly obtained a search warrant and entered Michael's apartment. According to the second version, the owner of the pizzeria where Michael worked noticed a certain similarity between his employee's car and the vehicle being sought in connection with the alleged child abduction. In the end, the man contacted the authorities, and one day FBI agents came to the establishment to talk to the suspect. During the conversation with the agents, Michael's nervousness was so obvious that he simply couldn't concentrate on the questions asked of him. When he was asked about the abduction, he only said that apparently there was some confusion. He said that his godson Sean was staying in his apartment, but he knew nothing about any Ben. An experienced FBI interrogator noticed that when mentioning the name Sean, Michael's pulse quickened, having in mind that very first missing child. As a result, the agent decided to intimidate the already frightened Michael and told him that they had tire samples from the car on which Ben was abducted. At that moment, the interviewee realized he was caught and lowered his head. After that, he stated that he knew he was a bad person. Hearing this, the interrogator asked if the abducted were in his apartment. Hiding his eyes, Michael nodded affirmatively. After finishing the interrogation, law enforcement officers, along with employees from other agencies, went to the apartment complex where Michael lived. As soon as they unlocked the door, little Ben ran out of the apartment. At the same time, a teenager of older age was sitting meekly on the couch in the living room. An officer approached him and asked his name. The young man replied, Sean Hornbeck. Hearing the name, the employee told him that he was safe and would soon be taken home. In Michael's apartment, besides absolute disorder and dirt, several firearms were found. While some police officers were engaged in a detailed inspection of the rooms, others took the young people to the FBI unit and soon contacted their parents. The Akers were driving when the call came. The woman quickly picked up the phone, but as soon as she heard the agent's voice, immediately handed the phone to her husband. Later, Craig would say that he would never forget that short phrase he heard at that moment. Thus, for their family, the nightmare that had lasted more than 4 years ended. Meanwhile, the news of the return of the missing young people to their families spread like wildfire. For days after Ben's abduction, the Franklin County Sheriff made a statement in which he reported both good and frankly incredible news. First of all, the man reported that 13-year-old Ben, abducted 4 days ago, was found safe and sound. Then the representative of local law enforcement told about Sean, the boy who was abducted more than 4 years earlier. Among other things, the sheriff noted that authorities managed to detain the kidnapper. The media dubbed this case the Missouri Miracle. It is no secret that criminals are divided into several types. The first are those who are born that way, and the second are those who become them. So who was the man who abducted the boys? Who was Michael Devlin? It is known that he was adopted and grew up in a large foster family in Webster Groves, Missouri. According to the stories of Michael's few acquaintances, he was friendly and sociable, right up until he developed diabetes. At some point, the disease complicated and led to the amputation of several toes on his foot. According to those who knew him at that time, these events changed his character and behavior. So, at the time of his arrest, 41-year-old Devlin was a lonely, withdrawn, and gloomy man who worked as a manager in a pizzeria. Overall, he gave the impression of a normal person, always paid his bills on time, and hardly conflicted with anyone. For many years, he tried to suppress his dark, perverted fantasies and desires toward teenagers. However, he understood that one day he would no longer be able to restrain himself. That's exactly what happened on Sunday, October 6, 2002. Michael went hunting with the goal of satisfying his needs. That day, he was lucky to spot a lone boy carelessly riding his bicycle on a dirt road. That boy was none other than Sean Hornbeck. He was so engrossed in riding that he didn't notice the van approaching from behind. The man rammed into the teenager, throwing him to the roadside along with the bicycle. After making sure the boy hadn't sustained serious injuries, Devlin tied his hands and loaded him into the back of his vehicle. At that moment, Hornbeck came to. Despite the fear, he asked Michael what was happening and why he was doing this. But the man replied, "You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." According to the stories of the freed teenager, in the first month of his captivity, he was sexually assaulted multiple times. Moreover, he was immobilized when the man went to work. He would gag him. To intimidate Sean and discourage any thought of escape, he showed him samples of firearms and threatened to take his life if he tried to escape or call for help. According to available data, in the first days after the abduction, he told him that he needed to give medicine to his cat. In reality, this was how he checked if his prey was still in the same place. After Sean's release, investigators and the public had quite a few speculations about why he could have voluntarily stayed with Michael. For example, at the moment when police officers entered Devlin's apartment, the 15-year-old young man was simply sitting on the couch and playing video games. There were no security measures in the kidnapper's apartment that could have prevented Sean's escape. In that case, why didn't he escape? Answers to such questions became known a little later when the captive began to speak. The young man said that after a month of his captivity, Michael attempted to get rid of him for safety reasons. At that moment, Sean's survival instinct kicked in, and he tried with all his might to bargain for a chance to continue existing. In the end, he succeeded. The teenager swore that he would never attempt to escape and would not betray Michael if he, in turn, allowed him to stay alive. Devlin agreed, making Hornbeck understand that he would take his life at the first suspicion of escape. Moreover, the man promised that in such a case, he would also take the lives of all his family members. Thus, the abducted young man made a deal with the devil. The next few months passed for Sean in complete captivity. Gradually, Michael became convinced that the victim of his abuses would not try to escape. It was obvious that the boy feared for himself and his family. Among other things, being a child, he didn't know where to go in case of escape. In other words, Sean simply had no other choice. Soon, Devlin began giving him some leniencies. For example, the captive could communicate with the neighbor boy. He told him that Michael was his father and his mother had died in a car accident. In addition, he said that he didn't go to school because he was homeschooled. Over time, the man began giving his captive various gifts. So, he first got a bicycle, then a game console, and after that, even a modern mobile phone. He regularly left the house and walked with his neighbor. Such circumstances played into Michael's hands, because with such freedom of action for the boy, no one could think that he had been kidnapped. According to Sean, once when he was visiting his neighbor, a report about his disappearance was shown on TV. Then, seeing a certain similarity, the friend's boy asked him if it was him, to which Hornbeck, stuttering, replied no. Sean interacted directly with police officers several times. The first time, he contacted them regarding the theft of his bicycle. The second time, police officers gave him a warning for riding a bicycle late at night. Thus, none of the law enforcement officers recognized him or provided him help. In addition, there was another noteworthy moment in which Sean left a message on the website created by his parents for the purpose of searching for him. The message published by the young man consisted of a single question: "How long will you continue to search for your son?" He even signed his name. In the end, no one paid attention to this message. In 2007, a turning point occurred in this story. Sean turned 15, and Michael began to think that the teenager had become too old for him and his pleasures. In connection with this, Devlin decided to find a replacement for him and commit another child abduction. This time, the man forced the young man to help him and become his accomplice. This was another way to force Hornbeck to remain silent, because even his simple presence at the time of the abduction made him an accomplice to the crime. Thus, if the guy decided to inform on Michael, he himself would also have to bear responsibility for what was done. In the end, everything turned out exactly as Devlin planned. On the day of Ben's abduction, Sean was in the passenger seat of his van. A few days after his rescue, Hornbeck, accompanied by his mother and stepfather, came to a press conference organized in the auditorium of a local school located not far from his hometown. Although the young man did not speak to journalists personally, his very presence filled the hearts of all present with joy. During this event, the young man, dressed in a simple blue tracksuit, sat next to his mother and hugged her tightly. Pam, Sean's mother, said that her son still felt like he was in a dream. However, this time it was a good dream. In the following months, the Akers appeared on various television shows, including the world-famous Oprah Winfrey Show. Being a guest on one channel or another, Hornbeck rarely described the events of his 4-year captivity himself. The young man tried to focus the audience's attention on what he believed was most important. He urged family members who had lost their loved ones to never stop searching for them, and victims of abductions to hold on and not lose hope. As for the abducted Ben Ownby, he was reunited with his family much faster, after only 4 days in captivity. It remains to hold Michael Devlin accountable for his horrific actions. During the trial, the criminal was charged with 1 count of kidnapping in Franklin County, as well as 1 count of kidnapping and criminal assault in Washington County. During his first court hearing, Michael did not plead guilty, despite having previously given a confession to the prosecutor. However, given the presence of irrefutable evidence of his guilt, this circumstance in no way prevented the court from proceeding. At the end of the first hearing, the man's arrest was extended, and the total bail amount was $40 million. A few days later, Michael's situation sharply worsened. This happened after the St. Louis County prosecutor added 71 counts of charges against him. In the indictment regarding Ben's abduction, there were 18 counts, one of which concerned the abduction itself, and the other 17 were related to unlawful acts of an intimate nature. In the indictment regarding Sean's abduction, there were 53 counts, and only one of them was directly related to the abduction. Each of the 71 counts of charges could entail a punishment of life imprisonment. In addition, other charges related to illegal possession of firearms were added. By October 2007, it became known that Michael Devlin officially pleaded guilty to all counts of charges in 3 jurisdictions. According to available data, the man detailed all the horrors that both Sean Hornbeck and Ben Ownby had to go through. You can find all these details on my Boosty if you follow the link in the description, as such content is blocked on YouTube. At the end of all court proceedings against Michael, he was sentenced to dozens of life terms. On January 30th, 2008, the criminal began serving his first life sentence. In total, Devlin was to serve a record 2,020 years. Thus, he would never be a free man again. Michael was held in a correctional center in the city of Cameron, located in Missouri. In March 2008, he gave an interview to agents from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, as well as a Maryland State Police investigator. The experts sought to understand the motivation and mindset of criminals like Michael Devlin in order to later train employees of various law enforcement agencies to search for and identify them at early stages. They spent a great deal of time preparing, looking for various ways to sustain a conversation with a subject who, in turn, was not too inclined to communicate. During the conversation, which lasted several hours, Michael was inclined towards self-analysis. In the end, he himself was interested in finding out what exactly prompted him to commit such crimes. Sean twice said that for years he struggled with attraction to teenagers. When asked by FBI agents how he would define his orientation, Devlin replied with one word: sick. Michael claimed that he had a happy childhood, despite being raised in a foster family. Unlike most stories of similar criminals, he was not subjected to physical violence or coercion into intimacy by anyone. According to him, around age 13, he realized that he was attracted to boys, while other young people were attracted to the opposite sex. He noted that in his teenage years, he had one unsuccessful attempt to coerce a peer into intimacy. After that, he tried to suppress these desires in himself. So, he did everything to occupy his thoughts with something else. He ate until he weighed 140 kilograms. Among other things, Devlin obsessively cleaned his apartment and played video games for hours. He stayed away from his relatives and friends' children, becoming a true outcast. Michael even confessed that he tried several times to enter relationships with adult men, but they could not satisfy his desires. According to the man, he struggled with his needs until the day he lost control over them. Not having developed communication skills to lure a victim deceitfully, he chose another method. So, he went hunting with the goal of abduction. Sometime later, as we already know, he found Sean. Devlin claimed that if authorities hadn't caught him, he would undoubtedly continue abductions. On April 9, 2011, during breakfast in the correctional facility, one of the inmates inflicted multiple stab wounds on Michael. According to available data, the man, who like Devlin was serving a life sentence, made a makeshift knife from metal guides of a typewriter. According to him, he attacked Michael because of the severity of the crimes he committed against children. Devlin, in turn, did not receive serious injuries and, after receiving medical assistance, was returned to the cell where he was held. After this incident, local authorities decided to consider the possibility of transferring the child abductor to another correctional facility located outside Missouri. They even talked about changing his name. However, the victims' families, who soon learned of this intention, opposed these measures to protect the criminal. For this reason, he continued to serve his sentence in the same place, with the only new measure being that he was placed under guard in a solitary confinement cell. Later, Devlin developed a rather severe depression. He stopped taking medications and stated that he no longer wanted to live. According to the latest data dated March 2022, Michael is still alive. Sean Hornbeck, as difficult as it may seem at first glance, managed to return to his normal life. It was only after 2 years following his rescue that he could detail what he had to face. At the time of the abduction, he was in the 5th grade of elementary school, but over 4 years of captivity, he had no opportunity to pursue his education. However, the young man wanted to catch up as quickly as possible, and in a year of intensive individual studies, he managed to catch up with his peers. Among other things, he engaged in sports and was a regular guest on various television shows. He always emphasized that the population, even in small towns, should be informed by authorities about any suspicious individuals living nearby. It should be noted that at this very moment in the information field, chilling information appeared about Sean's biological father. It turned out that in the past, the man had been convicted of a crime similar to what Michael Devlin committed. Moreover, according to the case materials, it involved a minor victim. On July 15, 2019, almost at the moment when Sean was about to turn 28, his stepfather Craig passed away. The man had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. He was buried at the National Cemetery with full military honors, as he had served in the U.S. Air Force for a long time and was a member of the Patriot Guard. Due to lack of funds and time, the Sean Hornbeck Fund, founded by his parents, was closed in 2013. However, it should be noted that its members continued the work and founded a search and rescue squad called Missouri Valley. Noteworthy was also the fact that the detectives investigating the case admitted that it would not have been solved if not for the ordinary memory of the only witness, a guy named Mitchell Hooch. The information about the suspicious van that he provided after Ben's abduction was highly noted by both local community representatives and FBI agents. The latter, in turn, hoped that as he grew older, the young man would consider a career in law enforcement. Unfortunately, information about whether this happened or not is absent. It is only known that in 2007, a car dealership located in St. Louis gifted him a pickup truck as a reward for helping in the search for the abduction victims. Huge thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and give it a like.